welcome, Damona. And thank you so much for being here.
It is truly my pleasure to be with you, Rachel. Thank you.
Yay. Well, I cannot wait to talk to you about your book. First of all, I think, as I was saying before, and as I've said to you, I think it's the book that we most need right now, given the changes, the major changes that are taking place astrologically, but also the changes that have happened just since COVID, and relationships have changed, and the way that people date and the way they meet one another has changed. And so I think, you've been in this field for a really long time. I think, we first met back in 2013. I think you had just started Dates and Mates.
That's right. Yeah. Yes, I started Dates and Mates in 2013. We're OG
We
podcasters,
are. We
Rachel.
totally
This is
are.
just a homecoming for
I
you
know
here.
it is. I know you kept with it, and I love your podcast. But, I would imagine that you've seen a lot of change in relationships and in the approach to dating in that time. I think before we get into your book, what are some of the most significant changes that you have noticed in the time that you've been doing this work?
See, I love talking to you because you always ask the good questions. And few people have asked that. And I think it's really important to start there. And that's really what I aim to do with F the Fairy Tale is to give people first an overview of how did we get here? Because I was starting to hear from a lot of people this growing frustration around dating. And you and I both know human connection is one of the most important things in our lives. So the fact that we were in this real communication crisis, I was like, let me peek under the hood and see what has shifted that put us in this place where the most important thing in our lives is causing us the most stress. And what I found was, first of all, the way we communicate has changed dramatically, not just in the last 4 years since the pandemic, but if we really look at the last 10 or 20 years. And a lot of times, I get so much frustration from my Dates and Mates listeners around dating apps, and we can dissect dating apps in a moment. But there's so much frustration around dating apps that I feel like is actually misplaced. I think we are frustrated because we are disconnected.
Mhm.
And what we crave is connection.
Mm.
Dating apps were never built to serve really that purpose of being a connection, a place for conversation. They were just the place to meet and then a tool to then move into connection. But because the way that we communicate has changed to digital, has become asynchronous, has totally shifted, we're really struggling with that, with finding connection on dating apps.
Mhm.
And then the second thing that has changed so dramatically is the speed of dating, the speed and the volume of dating. And so when those two things are happening concurrently, we're both going faster and there's more chatter, but we're saying less. That is a recipe for a lot of frustration in dating and relationships today.
Wow, that's something that I hear from so many of my clients too. Just the ways in which technology has changed dating, and then dating during COVID. You could write a whole book just on the dating challenges that took place during that time. And you were writing your book through COVID. Isn't that right? Didn't you start writing your book right at that time?
Yeah. It was like the longest book writing process ever. But yeah, I wrote it from 2020 basically to 2023. And at the same time also I was doing I always do a lot of media, so I was doing a lot of interviews about how is the pandemic going to affect dating and relationships. I remember saying to Ari Shapiro on All Things
Considered,
Considered,
yeah.
or
I
some one of the NPR shows.
Uh-huh.
I think they were doing like a special COVID
Yep, yep.
show, and I was like, "There's so much opportunity. Actually, I'm going to stay optimistic about what COVID can do." And I still will say there were a lot of relationships that were formed during COVID that would never have existed
Mhm.
without that.
Mhm.
And also, I think it got a lot of people who had never considered dating apps or never considered dating in online communities to come to online communities. And thank God we did have those options and opportunities because otherwise we would have been completely disconnected if you were a single person, in 2021. I'm sure some of your listeners went through that.
Right.
If you didn't have those ways to connect, you were completely an island. But I will say it was positive for a time. And then the compounding effects of the pandemic and the isolation and the communication changes, then I think has now turned into a negative as we are getting our bearings back.
Mm.
And Ari did laugh at me at the
Yeah,
time.
yeah. I actually
He was like, "How can you be optimistic?" And I'm like, "I have." That's kind of my brand, Rachel. Like, I feel like I have to stay
Yeah,
optimistic. The more pessimistic people are about dating, the more optimistic I have to,
right. That is one thing I
because
really
I have to carry
appreciate.
water.
You're the Sagittarius, the one who holds faith in love. So, I'm gonna backtrack now just a little bit because you're one of the reasons why I think your book is what we need right now is because now we are in this time of radical truth. And you so beautifully and artfully talk about the myths of relationships. And one thing in my practice that I hear a lot of times are the myth. It's almost like it's almost as if you were listening to my sessions about love and relationships and writing a book specifically about some of the challenges I hear for women mostly, but men too, in relationships. So, could you talk about the myths that you outline in your book and how that shapes our mindsets around love and relationships?
We must be talking to the same people, Rachel, because the reason I identified these myths is because those were the challenges that most people would come to me with. That the thing that I identified as the block that was keeping them from where they were to the relationship they wanted to be in. And I really look at dating relationships. It's a sort of continuum. The dating process really has to begin with you start out, we enter this world, we enter this world alone, we will leave this world alone. We got to know who we are and what will really make us feel the way we want to feel in a relationship. So the so I broke it into 4 parts basically, the way that I walk clients through the continuum of dating, from the mindset to the search to the actual date to then the future. And how do we sustain these relationships so we don't have to go back to the beginning? And sometimes we still have to go back to the beginning. But with the mindset, I really identified that the myth that was most prevalent there was this list myth.
Mm.
So people would write into dates and mates saying, "I'm looking for somebody who's this, this, and this." And, they'd have a list a mile long and say, "Where do I find this person?" Or we would start coaching and I would say, "Well, what are you looking for?" And they'd say, "Well, I don't know. I'll know it when I see it." And having no criteria for a match was also a challenge. So I started to look at what is that sweet spot between having this very rigid list, which in many times was the same list that I was hearing from client to client to client, and having no criteria at all. And I realized that the myth is really around what goes on that list, and that we really needed to flip the script on, literally and figuratively. We needed to flip the script on what we thought we needed and really go inward to go into that the mindset and that personal space of figuring out really where some of our beliefs come from about who we are in partnership and what we need in a partnership, and also then how look at how we really want to feel when we are with that person, because you might not notice it when you're checking the list, the boxes on the list, but you will always know it when you feel the way that you imagine you would feel in that relationship and that person is sitting right in front.
I love that. And I think at the end of the day, that's so much of what love is about. How many people have had an idea of who they want to be with, and then they meet someone and they fall in love, and the idea of who that person is very different or dissimilar in some ways from the idea or from that list. Is that an experience that you've seen, or when people shift and open their
Oh,
minds
yeah.
up?
It's an experience I've seen. It's an experience I've felt myself. And I talk about this in F the Fairy Tale. You're big into
Yes.
manifestation and magic. I
Yes.
did my own process. I was working with a feng shui consultant
Yes.
before I met my husband. And I was working with a coach and I was doing a lot of manifestation and clarification of what I wanted. And in that, I really identified who this person that was coming into my
Mm.
life and is now in my life would be. And when I say, Rachel, I was so on, like he is exactly the person that I ordered up from the universe. However, there were things when I look at the quote list before, there were things that were on the list that I didn't get that didn't freaking matter whatsoever. Like, it seems shallow now even saying it, but we're friends, I can tell you. I had things like must have good teeth. Now, my husband had gotten he played sports when he was a kid. He'd gotten his front tooth knocked out like 3 times. He didn't have a great front tooth, but you know what? That's why they have cosmetic dentistry. Now he has a great smile, and it's like,
Uh-huh.
it doesn't even matter. Like, why was I he's not a horse.
Right.
Why was I maybe because I'm a Sagittarius. I don't know.
Uh-huh.
Why was I fixated on that? I bring up that example because there's all these, like, silly little things, whether it's height or, what school they went to or how many miles they live from your house in LA, people will say 5 miles,
Right, right.
and that won't get you very
Uh-huh.
far here. And none of that necessarily adds up to the person that would ultimately make you the
Mhm.
happiest and how you wanna feel in a relationship.
Mhm.
His teeth have no bearing on a relationship here 20 years later.
Right. So that brings me to the must-haves and deal breakers. In your book, you talk about I love this concept that you talk about that, when you're creating your target. So instead of a list, thinking about it as like the feeling that you want to have when you're with this person. Can you talk about the importance of having must-haves? First of all, what are they? And secondly, what are ways to create those lists?
When I say the list is a myth, a lot of people think that means just throw away the list. And I wanted to give folks some parameters for how to identify what they actually needed because you need some criteria to sort through all the options. I think the reason that and this kind of goes into the second myth of when we're talking about the search, one of the reasons that people are so overwhelmed with dating apps and why everybody says, "Oh, it's the paradox of choice. Nobody wants to settle down anymore. There's too many options." It's not just the number of options you have, it's the lack of criteria by which to sort those options. Because if you don't have clarity on what you're looking for, everything is what do they say? If you're a hammer, everything looks like a
Right,
nail.
right, right.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
So if you're gonna waste a lot of time if you haven't gotten the clarity before you enter the dating process. Because everything is, everybody's a shiny new thing.
Mhm.
And you have a finite amount of energy. You can't be giving your energy away to all of those potential options. So we have the must-haves to really get crystal clear on what are 3 things. I only give my clients 3 must-haves. What are 3 must-haves that must be met in order for you to say yes to going on a date with that person, seeing them again, building a future? And those things also happen incrementally. So remember, I said the speed of dating has
Right.
increased dramatically. We need to slow all that down because in the slower process, then we can really figure out how we're feeling and getting feedback. And I said one deal breaker because girlfriend, I have seen so many deal breakers. People will come to me and like not I did a post the other day. I'm like, "What are your dating deal breakers?" Somebody came with like and they can't chew and they can't chew with their mouth open and they can't do this. That is not a deal breaker. That is not a deal breaker. That is an annoyance maybe, but that's not about who they are as a person. So I say one deal breaker, one strategically for the search process, but also Rachel, you know this. What happens when we talk about what we don't
Then
want
we
when
attract
we're
it. Yep,
manifesting?
draw that into our lives.
The
It is
truth.
so true.
That's right. So we don't want to fixate on that. We really want to focus on the things that are attractors, not the thing that we're pushing away.
Yeah, that's so important. Now, your book is full of those manifestation nuggets. I mean, they really are like gold nuggets of yes, she knows about this process and it's full of magic and you weave all of these, what we might consider more spiritual ideas, into the book in a way that's really practical. When you were in the process of drawing your husband, who is awesome, by the way, and I would never know about his teeth if you hadn't said that, and your children, beautiful family, beautiful family.
I put him on blast. Now everyone's gonna be studying his teeth.
Yeah. So, so it obviously, these techniques have worked for you, and you've worked with them with hundreds, maybe thousands of clients. What is
Yeah.
one practice that someone can do to strengthen their ability to draw love into their lives, whether they're in a relationship or they're single?
Just one?
Okay,
Just
one
one?
more. You can feel free to give as many as you want.
There are so many in the book, but I try to meet people, as you do as well. I try to meet people where they're at and what in a medium that feels really, really fulfilling for them. So I live in words, Rachel. Like
Right.
I mean, I wrote a book.
I
So
know.
but I love
Yeah.
words. So I love doing a living vision. A lot of it is just the visualization. So I'll do that with some clients with a living vision where they write the narrative of you wake up 6 months in the future and you're with this person. What will that look like? What will that feel like? Walk us through a day in the
Mm.
life of you in that relationship. And sometimes we'll write that out. Sometimes we'll just visualize it. Sometimes we'll just talk it out. And then for other clients, like I also do vision boarding. I have a whole section in the book and like vision boarding 101. I'm sure all of your listeners are very versed in vision boarding. But for a lot of my clients, all of this work that you and I
Mhm.
do is a lot of people know me from writing for the Washington Post and the LA Times or seeing me on TV. And they're like, she's very methodical and very strategic, which is true. And I fully believe in all of the work that you do and all of the work that you can't really see, that you
Mhm.
can't really quantify, but that you and I both know is all a part of making your dreams come true.
Yeah. And I have to ask this because you mentioned feng shui, and my wife is a feng shui expert author. So, what were the feng shui? And you talk about feng shuiing your relationships and your dating life, which I love that whole section. I was like, in your book. But what were some of the feng shui practices that you did to prepare your space and prepare your life for love?
I did all the things,
Uh-huh.
first of
Like two matching nightstands.
all. We did the
Uh-huh.
space clearing. I did a recent episode, of I have an episode of Dates and Mates that I've recorded with my feng shui consultant who I guess gotta shout her out, Nessa Freya, she's
Ah,
fantastic, but Tisha is also
yeah.
fantastic. So I just do whatever she says, and so she was like, "We have to clear the space." Okay, we're gonna clear the space. We need to place pairs of things in your room, so we're inviting that person in before they arrive, and it's funny because now I can see how much of the work, the quote, practical work
Mhm.
that I do comes from so many of these Eastern philosophies and practices and the woo woo.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I'll say that clients, like with their time, when you're structuring your time before you've met the date, carve out that date time for them before they arrive. I've had clients that have said, "Oh, I can't do it. I'll make the time when they come." No, no, they're not going to feel that you have the time. You have to create that space. So in the same way in feng shui, having a space that invites that person in with two nightstands
Mhm.
or two lamps, two side tables so that they will feel the space for them when they arrive. Also, just in the imagery that we're
Mhm.
looking at. And I feel like some of this stuff works on a more, esoteric level and some of it is just mentally programming
Right.
yourself. If you're looking at all of these images of yourself solo or you're looking at family photos in your bedroom that are like of your grandma who's going to be looking at you in that bedroom with somebody else. Like, is that the space you want to invite your grandma into? So we have to really be mindful of the imagery that we are looking
Mhm.
at every day and the spaces. Be mindful about the spaces, the way that we set up our space. I find that it's less about doing it, quote, by the book of like, here's north, south, east, west, here's the elements, and practicing feng shui in that way. It's for me so much more about setting the intention and then making choices in your space to support the intention that
Mhm.
you've created for yourself. And I don't know how that helpful people box works. The helpful people box, the God
Oh,
box, the
yeah.
there's so many different names for it.
Mhm.
But it is truly, truly
It
magic.
really
And that's
is.
why I'm so into words as well, like,
Mhm.
put the message to the universe on a piece of paper, and that is in a sacred
Mm,
space,
mhm.
something really beautiful happens.
Mhm.
Maybe you can say why that works. I don't know, but it
Yeah,
does.
well, what it is it's blending the unseen and and the seen, the visible and the invisible, the spiritual and the material, and that's what magic is. Magic is bringing the spiritual into the tangible. So yeah, you're right. It's such a powerful experience. But what happens when people are doing the rituals and they are writing their intentions down and doing all the feng shui and they're still not attracting love?
It is, as you said, sort of a dance between the different modalities. So I get really strategic in my dating coaching programs about what are the actions you're taking specifically. We clarify the mindset, but then we start to go into what's the second myth. The second myth is the rules myth. We have all been sold a bill of goods. We've all fallen in love with fairy tales. We've all seen the rom coms. We think it's supposed to go a certain way. And our brains love
Mhm.
stories. So we start playing out scripts that we don't even realize are there. And what I love doing is getting in there and changing the POV on the script. Like, okay, let's just say what if you're not the protagonist? What if you're the narrator? And then when we look at this in a different way, how would you change the actions of the protagonist to get them to their end result? So then within the actual choices that you're making in how you're showing up in spaces, if you are drawing in a relationship, are you really open to it when you go out? We can't just do the feng shui cures in your home and then be like, "Okay, magic works." You have to then also support it with action, right?
Yeah.
So then we start to look at the actions that you're taking offline, the way that you're showing up in spaces where you might meet that person, the people that you're speaking to about what you're looking to bring in. So another reason we do the 3 must-haves and 3 deal breakers, I mean, 1 deal breaker, mhm, 3 must-haves and 1 deal breaker is so that you can communicate that to your community, engage them in expanding your dating pool. People wanna see you be happy.
Mhm.
If you want partnership, people want to support you in bringing that into your life. But people will say to me, "Well, I wanted to meet someone through friends, but no one ever set me up." Well, did you ask? No, it felt awkward to say that I wanted to meet someone, to express what I was looking for in a match. I just said, "Do you know anybody?" And then I just got anybody. The more specific, this also through the magic work
Mhm.
that you do. The more specific you can be with the universe, with the people in your community, with the dating app, the more specific you are, the more you can get your needs met.
Mhm.
But if you just open it up too wide and you're like, your energy's going in all these different directions, it's exhausting.
Mhm.
And it's really hard to feel the way that you want to
Mhm.
feel and to move into the relationship you want to move into.
Mhm, absolutely. And are some of those rules like the limiting beliefs that we might have around relationships? Like, I can't have love and money, or I have to be with someone who's taller than me. Like, are those the kinds of rules that you're talking about?
Those are the kind of rules. So that's why all of the myths sort of layer
Mhm.
on one
Mhm.
another. It's a little bit of mindset. That's a little bit of the rules. We have the mindset. We have the belief that we may not even realize is in there of they must be taller. They must make this much money. They must be, I even talk about race. They must be this certain race. And maybe they've never declared that, but they've always dated in this with them. Gender, same. Like what you believed to be true before wasn't true. What if you were running a script that was fed to you by rom-coms and fairy tales, by your family of origin, by society, and let's just pretend for one moment that it is not true. That script is just not true. How would you move differently into relationships? Who would you engage with? How would you engage differently if you came to a different conclusion? And if that script just no longer fit the life that you were living.
Mhm.
And it's a little overwhelming sometimes when you really think about like, wait, anything can be
Yeah.
possible.
Yeah.
Anything could be possible. So, yes, it is all of those things. And I think the really interesting part of this process, because dating really is a process of self discovery as much as it is a process of discovering another person.
Mhm.
So I love that work with my clients of
Mm.
peeking under the hood and asking those questions. I talk about in F the Fairy Tale, doing the
Yeah.
5 whys, which was an old business technique Toyota came up with to figure out, to get to the root of something. Well, I don't date men who are under 6 feet. Well, why? Well, I don't know. I just never have, or I'm just not attracted to them. Why? Oh, now it's getting really interesting
Yes.
because wait, have never stopped to think about that. Now, I love a short king, so that doesn't apply to me. But, we do have these really deeply ingrained
Mhm.
beliefs about whether height was connected to health and wealth.
Mhm.
In the Middle Ages, you're literally out here dating like it's the Middle Ages and it's 2024.
Yeah, I love that.
Surely not anyone listening to this
Right.
podcast, but there's something in there for you to unpack.
Yeah, and, I'm reflecting now on just the challenges that we've had in our relationship, and we have a great marriage, and, everything's really good. We worked really hard to get here, but some of the challenges that we've had have to do with those old ingrained rules and beliefs. And being in a queer relationship, a lesbian relationship, it's like you have to face I feel like you have to face the rules on a in a heightened state of awareness more than I've been in heterosexual relationships too. So have you and now there this new generation coming up, many of them are really open and more flexible about their sexual orientation, Gen Z and, even younger than that. Have you noticed a shift in the rules and in those beliefs working with younger people versus working like I'm Gen X, working with Gen X and millennial?
And I have a Gen Z daughter,
Uh-huh.
although she's almost Gen Alpha, which
Oh.
she would be horrified that I called her almost Gen Alpha. She really wants to lock on to this Gen Z
Uh-huh.
thing. But so I see it even
Mm.
in the next generation. I even had her on my podcast talking about what is coming up for her generation in dating. And even in between generations, I think it does come up in a different way. And it's really important when I'm working with most of my clients are more
Mhm.
millennial and Gen X, but I do have a lot of podcast listeners who are Gen Z. And I would say their bigger challenge is this paradox of choice that I was talking about where when you rip down this, you can't just take away the script, right? You can't just take away the rules and then just say, I'm just going to take it all in and see what happens. With them, I need to really drill down into getting clarity then on what fits for them, what is important to them, because it can be very overwhelming
Mm.
if you are so rejecting of scripts that you have no criteria for
Mm.
yourself. I'm just asking that people examine those rules
Mhm.
that they've just lived by and ask some of the questions that are really where Gen Z is sort of starting out,
Yeah.
right? And then it's in how you make different choices for sure.
I love that.
For sure. It is very different. It is different with each generation. It's different with different I have clients of all genders, all orientations, all ages, all locations. Yes, it varies a little bit from person to person, from place to place. But at the core, we do all want the same thing. We want human connection.
Mm.
And having seen thousands of cases now, as you were saying, thousands of listeners, thousands of clients, there are certain universals that and these steps I think are helpful to people regardless of what they're looking for. You got to get clear on what you want. You have to have a plan and adjust the way that you've been operating if you haven't gotten to that relationship that you want. And then you may also have to show up differently, and that's where we start getting into the latter myths
Mhm.
of the chemistry myth and then, of course, the soulmate
Yeah.
myth, which I really wanna get to because I wanna hear your take on it.
Okay, yes, I am okay, let's just skip right to the well, actually, can we touch on the chemistry myth? Can you give us a and then I'm excited about the soulmate myth too, because that one was good. This is one I hear a lot. So so yeah, let's talk.
I figured you would,
Uh-huh.
which is why I wanna talk to you about it, but the chemistry myth is probably the most prevalent in my work. People will say to me, "Oh, I felt butterflies the first time, and it's so good, and now is this person my soulmate?" And I'm like, hold on. Remember slow love? We have to take our time. So with all the speed of dating that I was talking about a moment ago, we're just going on momentum.
Mhm.
And sometimes we don't check in with the other pillars that we've built from the mindset and from the search. And we just dive right into feeling. But it is this dance between both how do we feel and what do we actually need. And I'll be the first to tell you chemistry is a liar.
Mm.
It's a liar. And I'm not saying you shouldn't feel connection to the person in front of you, but we can often be misled by just leaning into chemistry.
This is something I say astrologically a lot because Mars represents our like passionate sexual attraction. And a lot of people feel that Mars connection and it's like hot. But if you don't have Venus and the moon, if you don't have a balance for it, then it can just be too much. So I was right there. I am right there with you in that chemistry isn't everything. And plus relationships can change too. Is that part of this too? What do you do when when you don't feel that sexual chemistry, that electric feeling?
I believe that true chemistry develops over
Mm.
time. And most people, when they feel butterflies, don't realize the signal that their body is telling them. It may be fight or flight. It may be this person reminds me of my ex. It may be this person triggers something from my childhood. And we just feel anything and we're like, that's it. They're the one. We got to slow it down because if you can space out the interactions, really check in with how you're feeling in between the interactions. And you can see that are led by curiosity about the other person. And I'm sure you've seen this in your own relationship too. That's an endless well that will keep deepening over time. Like I've been with my husband 20 years. I'm still learning new things about him. I'm still so curious about the way his brain works. I'll just like throw out a topic and I'll be like, what do you think about, what do you think about the election? And I just wanna soak that up and hear how he sees the world. And that's the kind of connection that sustains for a long-term relationship. And I will admit, most of the clients that I coach, they're going for a long-term relationship. Some marriage, some not, but long-term sustainable connection is really what F the Fairy Tale is written for.
Yeah.
You can go on Tinder and you can hook up, and I wish you the best. But I'm really here rooting for the
Yeah.
relationships.
So let's talk about that soulmate myth and why that can be a trap for people and what to do about that.
I wanna get your take on this, but I'll start with my take
Okay.
on soulmates. First of all, I think we need to examine the definition of soulmate because when I talk about the soulmate myth in the book, I'm talking about this singular idea, this twin flame idea that it's weird, this is totally trending now. I wrote this all 2 years ago. I wrote about, "Let's stop with the twin flames," and now there's, like, twin flames universe, and, this idea that there's one perfect person out there predestined for you, and they're either your person or they're not. It, first of all, stops you from being able to see whoever is in front of you. And you and I are both in long-term relationships. It's not always going to be obvious or perfect. There are times when you're going to have to negotiate and you're going to have to compromise and there is going to be conflict. And if you are believing that someone is this soulmate perfection, this perfect person who is going to quote complete you, which is really what when you talk about the true identity of soulmate and how it has shown up in myths and literature throughout history, that is what we are looking for. One perfect person to complete us. And then when I hear that, I'm like, "Oh, doesn't that just seem exhausting too?" Because then you're looking for a needle in a haystack.
Yeah.
How overwhelming. I would rather take the perspective that, first of all, there is no one person out there to complete you. I very much believe that you should have a lot of different relationships to enhance all of the different parts of yourself. And it's really hard on relationships when you make that one partner be your everything. They're your business partner, they're your confidant, they're your co-parent, they're your sexual partner. They're like that's a lot of pressure for one person. So, can you have multiple quote soulmates? I don't even like using the word
Mhm.
soulmates, Rachel, because I think it's so loaded.
Mhm.
But if you expand your thinking around that, I think it creates a lot more possibility. but I'm sure it comes up a lot in your
It
work.
does, and I agree with you that we have many different types of soulmates, and basically what a soulmate is, if you read any of the literature about it, it's really someone that you've contracted with before incarnating to say, "Hey, I wanna have an experience with you." Does that mean we're gonna be together forever? No. A lot of times people meet their soulmate, like, meet someone that they think, "This is the person I'm gonna marry," and it feels like that soulmate kind of connection, and it doesn't end up in a long-term relationship. But how can you say that that person wasn't valuable to your own experience and that they didn't teach you something about yourself and about love? So I feel a similar way, and I think the whole conversation about twin flames is also really messy because a lot of people will fall, "Ooh, this is a good I wanna actually ask you about this." So a lot of people fall in love with someone who's unavailable and they have this push pull relationship. And a lot of those types of relationships people have categorized, in my experience and in my practice, as twin flame relationships. What do you think, or what advice would you have for someone who is in one of those kinds of push pull relationships where someone isn't completely available?
Well, it comes back to how do you want to feel in
Mm.
the relationship?
Mhm.
Do you want to feel like you're push pulling your partner? I don't. Do you?
Not at all. No.
I don't think
No.
so. So, regardless, and this is why we have to step away from the list and the rules because that list will keep us going back for more. Like, but they have all these things and they check all these boxes, and we can talk ourselves into
Yeah.
anything. But if it comes back to, gosh, I don't like how this person makes me feel, I agree with you, Rachel, that every person who comes into your path presents a learning opportunity for you. And sometimes the learning is like, I don't even ever want to do that again. And sometimes the learning is, I enjoyed that moment in time and I have a lot of memories and I know it's possible. That's another thing that I say for a lot of my clients that will meet someone, have a beautiful relationship that develops, and then sometimes people are in your life for a reason or a season.
Mhm.
And sometimes it ends and what I always find myself doing in that moment is reminding them, but now you know that it's possible to feel that way again. Because maybe when you came to me 2 years ago, you were in the place where I don't even think it's going to happen for me. And now you know it could happen. And this person wasn't your forever person, but they served that purpose.
Beautiful. I think that's such an important insight. And I think it goes along with breaking that myth. Is there a myth that you have to be married to one person? Do you have a core belief that you have to be married to one person and that's the only kind of valuable love experience? And so many of those internalized rules can keep us separate from the experience of feeling love.
Yeah, and even I think it's just so liberating that we have so much choice
Mhm.
today, even in what that looks like. A lot of my clients are saying, I don't want to be married. I want companionship, but I don't, maybe they were married before, or maybe, that's not their goal. I think it's amazing because even 20 years ago, that wasn't
Yeah.
possible. And, for some of your listeners, I'm sure 20 years ago, it wasn't actually even possible for them to be married.
Right.
So, look at the choice that we have in even just in the last few years. And I'm seeing trends for living apart together. Like you can have a relationship, but why do you have to cohabitate? Like that was the relationship escalator of the last, 30 years. You meet and you move in together. It's a trial for marriage or a long-term relationship. Get married, you have picket fence, and I guess then you have the kids, and and it's like, that it doesn't always play out like that.
Mhm.
And it doesn't have to.
Mhm.
And you get to write the rules of your own love story. You get to create the path that is before you. I am so
Mm.
energized by that and seeing all of the possibilities for all of your listeners right now if they take the reins.
Yeah.
That's what I want people to do, to not say, "Oh, dating apps. Dating is so frustrating today. I'm done with the complaining. I'm just done with it." I know the experiences that clients go through, but what if we took a more empowering approach for ourselves, a more hopeful approach, and we took the reins of our own dating destiny?
Yes, I love that, I love that. That it feels liberating even just thinking about it as a married person. who still thinks I'm dating and falling in love with my wife every day. So yeah, so
Beautiful.
gosh,
I love
Damona, this
that.
you've just given us so much, so many nuggets of truth and of wisdom from your experience. One thing I love to do is to leave my listeners with a call to action. So it's something they can do to connect the information into their everyday lives for the next couple of weeks or for the rest of their lives if they want to. Do you have any thoughts or any suggestions about what we could leave our listeners with?
The easiest thing to do is to buy F the Fairy Tale. No,
Yes,
I'm kidding.
yes. Oh my god. Well, that's a
The
given.
easiest
That's a given. And the links will be in the show
I was
notes,
joking.
and the links to dates and mates, and the
But yes,
links to
do that.
your coaching will all be in the show notes.
See what I did there?
Yep.
No, the easiest thing to do, honestly, this is actually not even an exercise in the book. There are deeper exercises, but this is kind of the entry point for a lot of the folks listening today is to just become aware of your predominant thoughts around dating and relationships. If you're in partnership right now, think about the things that you repeat to yourself about your relationship, about your partner. And if you are seeking a relationship, think about what that messages that's playing in your head all the time about why you're single, about what you would need in a relationship, about why other people are moving into relationships around you and it hasn't happened for you that way, about using dating apps. A lot of times people are they're saying, "Oh, I hate dating apps." And then they open the dating app and they're like, "Ah, I hate it." And then you swipe from that place of just like,
Uh-huh.
dating app. Just become aware of those thoughts and doesn't take a lot to identify what those thoughts are and how often they tend to come up. The first step is just awareness. The second step, and that's what I talk about in F the Fairy Tale, is how to rewrite that mantra and to become aware of when you are saying that limiting belief, replacing it with a more positive, hopeful, optimistic, empowering statement that is going to completely change the way you are moving through the world, whether you're dating offline or online or already in a relationship. First, become aware, and then we can start to change the narrative. That's how you write your own love
Mm.
story.
I love it. I love it. Damona, thank you so much for being on the show and congratulations. Do you have any upcoming events or courses or appearances on the Drew Barrymore show that we need to know about?
Well, we're on hiatus for
Okay.
Drew over the summer. So there's always repeats. I'm sure you'll catch me from time to time there. I do the Dates and Mates podcast every week, like clockwork. I love taking questions there. We're doing special summer series that's going to be really insightful and actionable. And yes, I have all the things. I have courses, I have templates for online dating. I have my signature course, the Dating Accelerator Program. All of that is at damonahoffman.com. And also if you follow me on
Yeah,
Instagram.
her Instagram is so good. So I hope everybody stops everything you're doing right now and go buy the book and follow you on your podcast and also on your Instagram. So thank you so much, Damona.
Thank
It
you,
was so
Rachel.
great talking to you.
It was great to be on the
Yeah.
show. I was first a
Ah,
listener and
ah.
fan. Friend,
Yep, yep.
fan, and now guest.
Aw, thank you.